This is an audio recording of Gifted Hands, The Ben Carson, by Ben Carson, narrated by Right Here Audio. Chapter 3, 8 Years Old. Rats! I yelled. Hey Kurt, looky there, I saw rats! I pointed in horror to a large weeded area behind our tenement building. And they're bigger than cats! Not quite that big, Curtis countered, trying to sound more mature. But they sure are mean-looking. Nothing in Detroit had prepared us for life in a Boston tenement. Armies of roaches streaked across the room, impossible to get rid of no matter what Mother did. More frightening to me were the hordes of rats, even though they never got close. Mostly they lived outside in the weeds or piles of debris, but occasionally they scurried into the basement of our building, especially during the cold weather. I'm not going down there by myself, I said adamantly more than once. I was scared to go down into the basement alone, and I wouldn't budge unless Curtis or Uncle William went with me. Sometimes snakes came out of the weeds to slither down the sidewalks. Once a big snake crawled into our basement and someone killed it. For days afterward, all us kids talked about snakes. You know, a snake got into one of those buildings behind us last year and killed 4 children in their sleep, one of my classmates said. They gobble you up, insisted another. No, they don't, the first one said and laughed. They kind of sting you and then you die. Then he told another story about somebody being killed by a snake. The stories weren't true, of course, but hearing them often enough kept them in my mind, making me cautious, fearful, and always on the lookout for snakes. A lot of winos and drunks flopped around the area, and we became so used to seeing broken glass, trashed lots, dilapidated buildings, and squad cars racing up the street that we soon adjusted to our change of lifestyle. Within weeks, the setting seemed perfectly normal and reasonable. No one ever said, "This isn't the way normal people live." Again, I think it was the sense of family unity, strengthened by the Averys, that kept me from being too concerned about the quality of our life in Boston. Of course, Mother worked, constantly. She seldom had much free time, but she showered that time on Curtis and me, which made up for the hours she was away. Mother started working in homes of wealthy people, caring for their children or doing domestic work. You look tired, I said one evening when she walked into our narrow apartment. It was already dark and she'd put in a long day working 2 jobs, neither of them well-paying. She leaned back in the overstuffed chair. "Guess I am," she said as she kicked off her shoes. Her smile caressed me. "What did you learn in school today?" she asked. No matter how tired she was, if we were still up when she got home, Mother didn't fail to ask about school. As much as anything, her concern for our education began to impress on me that she considered school important. I was still 8 years old when we moved to Boston, a sometimes serious-minded child who occasionally pondered all the changes that had come into my life. One day I said to myself, being 8 is fantastic, because when you're 8, you don't have any responsibilities. Everybody takes care of you, and you can just play and have fun. But I also said, it's not always going to be this way. So I'm going to enjoy life now. With the exception of the divorce, the best part of my childhood happened when I was 8 years old. First, I had the most spectacular Christmas of my life. Curtis and I had a wonderful time Christmas shopping. Then our aunt and uncle swamped us with toys. Mother, too, trying to make up for the loss of our father, bought us more than she ever had before. One of my favorite gifts was a scale model, 1959 Buick with friction wheels. But the chemistry set topped even the toy Buick. Never before or since did I have a toy that held my interest like the chemistry set. I spent hours in the bedroom playing with the set, studying the directions and working one experiment after another. I turned litmus paper blue and red. I mixed chemicals into strange concoctions and watched in fascination when they fizzled, foamed, or turned different colors. When something I'd created filled the whole apartment with the smell of rotten eggs, or worse, I'd laugh until my sides ached. Second, I had my first religious experience when I was 8 years old. We were Seventh-day Adventists, and one Saturday morning, Pastor Ford at the Detroit Burns Avenue Church illustrated his sermon with a story. A natural storyteller, Pastor Ford told a missionary doctor husband and wife who were being chased by robbers in a far-off country. They dodged around trees and rocks, always managing to keep just ahead of the bandits. At last, gasping with exhaustion, the couple stopped, short at a precipice. They were trapped. Suddenly, right at the edge of the cliff, they saw a small break in the rock, a split just big enough for them to crawl into and hide. Seconds later, when the men reached the edge of the escarpment, they couldn't find the doctor and his wife. To their unbelieving eyes, the couple had just vanished. After screaming and cursing them, the bandits left. As I listened, the picture became so vivid that I felt as if I were being chased. The pastor wasn't overly dramatic, but I got caught up in an emotional experience. Living there, plight as if the wicked men were trying to capture me. I visualized myself being pursued. My breath became shallow with the panic and fear and desperation of that couple. At last, when the bandits left, I sighed with relief at being safe. Pastor Ford looked out over the congregation. The couple were sheltered and protected, he told us. They were hidden in the cleft of the rock, and God protected them from harm. The sermon over. We began to sing the appeal song. That morning the pastor had selected, "He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock." He built his appeal around the missionary story and explained our next to flee. The cleft of the rock. To safety found only in Jesus Christ. If we place our faith in the Lord, he said as his gaze swept across the faces in the congregation, we'll always be safe in Jesus Christ. As I listened, my imagination pictured how wonderfully God had taken care of those people who wanted to serve him. Through my imagination and emotions, I lived that story with the couple, and I thought that's exactly what I should do. Get sheltered in the cleft of the rock. Although I was only 8, my decision seemed perfectly natural. Other kids my age were getting baptized and joining the church. So when the message and music touched me emotionally, I responded. Following the custom of our denomination, when Pastor Ford asked if anyone wanted to turn to Jesus Christ, Curtis and I both went up to the front of the church. A few weeks later, we were both baptized. I was basically a good kid and hadn't done anything particularly wrong. Yet for the first time in my life, I knew I needed God's help. During the next 4 years, I tried to follow the teachings I received at church. That morning set another milestone for me. I decided I wanted to be a doctor, a missionary doctor. The worship services and our Bible lessons frequently focused on stories about missionary doctors. Each story of medical missionaries traveling through primitive villages in Africa or India intrigued me. Reports came to us of the physical suffering the doctors relieved and how they helped people to lead happier and healthier lives. "That's what I want to do," I said to my mother as we walked home. "I want to be a doctor." "Can I be a doctor, Mother?" "Benny," she said, "listen to me." We stopped walking and Mother stared into my eyes. Then laying her hands on my thin shoulders, she said, "If you ask the Lord for something and believe He will do it, then it'll happen." "I believe I can be a doctor." "Then, Benny, you will be a doctor," she said matter-of-factly, and we started to walk again. After Mother's word of assurance, I never doubted what I wanted to do with my life. Like most kids, I didn't have any idea of what a person had to do to become a doctor, but I assumed that if I did well in school, I could do it. By the time I turned 13, I wasn't so sure I wanted to be a missionary, but I never deviated from wanting to enter the medical profession. We moved to Boston in 1959 and stayed until 1961, when Mother moved us back to Detroit because she was financially on her feet again. Detroit was home for us, and besides, Mother had a goal in mind. Even though it wasn't possible in the beginning, she planned to go back and reclaim the house we'd lived in. The house, about the size of many garages today, was one of those early prefab post-World War II square boxes. The whole building probably wasn't 1,000 square feet, but it was in a nice area where the people kept their lawns clipped and showed pride in where they lived. "Boys," she told us as the weeks and months passed, "just wait. We're going back to our house on Deacon Street. We may not be able to afford living in it now, but we'll make it. In the meantime, we can still use the rent we get from it." Not a day passed that Mother didn't talk about going home. Determination burned in her eyes, and I never doubted that we would. Mother moved us into a multi-family dwelling just across the tracks from a section called Delray. It was a smoggy industrial area crisscrossed with train tracks, housing little sweatshops making auto parts. It was what I'd call an upper-lower class neighborhood. The three of us lived on the top floor. My mother worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time. At one place, she cared for children, and at the next, she cleaned house. Whatever kind of domestic work anyone needed, Mother said, "I can do it. If I don't know how right now, I learn fast." Actually, there wasn't much else she could do to make a living, because she had no other skills. She gained a lot of common sense education on these jobs, because she was clever and alert. As she worked, she carefully observed everything around her. She was especially interested in the people, because most of the time she worked for the wealthy. She'd come home and tell us, "This is what wealthy people do. This is how successful people behave. Here's how they think." She constantly drilled this kind of information into my brother and me. "Now you boys can do it too," she'd say with a smile, adding, "and you can do it better." Strangely enough, Mother started holding those goals in front of me when I wasn't a good student. No, that's not exactly true. I was the worst student in my whole 5th grade class at Higgins Elementary School. My first 3 years in the Detroit public school system had given me a good foundation. When we moved to Boston, I entered the 4th grade, with Curtis 2 years ahead of me. We transferred to a small private church school, because Mother thought that would give us a better education than the public schools. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Though Curtis and I both made good grades, the work was not as demanding as it could have been, and when we transferred back to the Detroit public school system, I had quite a shock. Higgins Elementary School was predominantly white. Classes were tough, and the fifth graders that I joined could outdo me in every single subject. To my amazement, I didn't understand anything that was going on. I had no competition for the bottom of the class. To make it worse, I seriously believed I'd been doing satisfactory work back in Boston. Being at the bottom of the class hurt enough by itself, but the teasing and taunting from the other kids made me feel worse. As kids will do, there was the inevitable conjecture about grades after we'd taken a test. Someone invariably said, "I know what Carson got." "Yeah, a big 0, another would shoot back. "Hey, dummy, think you'll get one right this time?" "Carson got one right last time. You know why? He was trying to put down the wrong answer." Sitting stiffly at my desk, I acted as if I didn't hear them. I wanted them to think I didn't care what they said. But I did care. Their words hurt, but I wouldn't allow myself to cry or run away. Sometimes a smile plastered my face when the teasing began. As the weeks passed, I accepted that I was at the bottom of the class because that's where I deserved to be. I'm just dumb. I had no doubts about that statement, and everybody else knew it too. Although no one specifically said anything to me about my being black, I think my poor record reinforced my general impression that black kids just were not as smart as white ones. I shrugged, accepting the reality. That's the way things were supposed to be. Looking back after all these years, I can almost still feel the pain. The worst experience of my school life happened in the 5th grade after a math quiz. As usual, Mrs. Williamson, our teacher, had us hand our papers to the person seated behind us for grading while she read the answers aloud. After grading, each test went back to its owner. Then the teacher called our names and we reported our own grade aloud. The test contained 30 problems. The girl who corrected my paper was the ringleader of the kids who teased me about being dumb. Mrs. Williamson started calling the names. I sat in the stuffy classroom, my gaze traveling from the bright bulletin board to the wall of windows covered with paper cutouts. The room smelled of chalk and children, and I ducked my head, dreading to hear my name. It was inevitable. "Benjamin?" Mrs. Williamson waited for me to report my score. I mumbled my reply. 9. Mrs. Williamson dropped her pen, smiled at me, and said with real enthusiasm, "Why, Benjamin, that's wonderful!" For me to score 9 out of 30 was incredible. Before I realized what was going on, the girl behind me yelled out, "Not 9, she snickered. "He got none. He didn't get any of them right." Her snickers were echoed by laughs and giggles all over the room. "That's enough," the teacher said sharply, but it was too late. The girl's harshness cut out my heart. I don't think I ever felt so lonely or so stupid in my whole life. It was bad enough that I missed almost every question on just about every test, but when the whole class, at least it seemed like everyone there, laughed at my stupidity, I wanted to drop through the floor. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to cry. I'd die before I let them know how they hurt me. Instead, I slapped a don't-care smile on my face and kept my eyes on my desk and the big round 0 on the top of my test. I could easily have decided that life was cruel, that being black meant everything was stacked against me. And I might have gone that way except for 2 things that happened during 5th grade to change my perception of the whole world. Chapter 4. 2 Positives. "I don't know," I said as I shook my head. I can't be sure. Again, I felt stupid from the top of my head to the bottom of my sneakers. The boy in the front of me had read every single letter on the chart down to the bottom line without any trouble. I couldn't see well enough to read beyond the top line. "That's fine," the nurse said to me, and the next child in line stepped up to the eye examination chart. Her voice was brisk and efficient. "Remember now, try to read without squinting." Halfway through my 5th grade, the school gave us a compulsory eye examination. I squinted, Tried to focus and read the first line? Barely. The school provided glasses for me. Free. When I went to get fitted, the doctor said, "Son, your vision is so bad you almost qualify to be labeled handicapped." Apparently my eyes had worsened gradually, and I had no idea they were so bad. I wore my new glasses to school the next day, and I was amazed. For the first time, I could actually see the writing on the chalkboard from the back of the classroom. Getting glasses was the first positive thing to start me on my climb upward from the bottom of the class. Immediately after getting my vision corrected, my grades improved. Not greatly, but at least I was moving in the right direction. When the midterm report cards came out, Mrs. Williamson called me aside. "Benjamin," she said, "on the whole, you're doing so much better." Her smile of approval made me feel like I could do better yet. I knew she wanted to encourage me to improve. I had a D in math, but that did indicate improvement. At least I hadn't failed. Seeing that passing grade made me feel good. I thought, I made a D in math. I'm improving. There's hope for me. I'm not the dumbest kid in the school. When a kid like me who had been at the bottom of the class for the first half of the year suddenly zoomed upward, even if only from F to D, that experience gave birth to hope. For the first time since entering Higgins School, I knew I could do better than some of the students in my class. Mother wasn't willing to let me settle for such a lowly goal as that. "Oh, it's an improvement, all right," she said. "And Benny, I'm proud of you for getting a better grade." And why shouldn't you? You're smart, Benny. Despite my excitement and sense of hope, my mother wasn't happy. Seeing my improved math grade and hearing what Mrs. Williamson had said to me, she started emphasizing, "But you can't settle for just barely passing. You're too smart to do that. You can make the top math grade in the class." "But Mother, I didn't fail," I moaned, thinking she hadn't appreciated how much my work had improved. "All right, Benny. You've started improving," Mother said, "and you're going to keep on improving." "I'm trying," I said. "I'm doing the best I can." "But you can do better, and I'm going to help you." Her eyes sparkled. I should have known that she had already started formulating a plan. With Mother, it wasn't enough to say, "do better." She would find a way to show me how. Her scheme worked out as we went along. Turned out to be the second positive factor. My mother hadn't said much about my grades until the report cards came out at mid-year. She had believed the grades from the Boston school reflected progress, but once she realized how badly I was doing at Higgins Elementary, she started in on me every day. However, Mother never asked, "Why can't you be like those smart boys?" Mother had too much sense for that. Besides, I never felt she wanted me to compete with my classmates as much as she wanted me to do my best. "I've got two smart boys," she'd say. "Two mighty smart boys." "I'm doing my best," I'd insist. "I've improved in math." "But you're going to do better, Benny," she told me one evening. "Now, since you've started getting better in math, you're going to go on. And here's how you'll do it. First thing you're going to do is memorize your times tables." "My times tables?" I cried. I couldn't imagine learning so much. "Do you know how many there are? Why, that could take a year." She stood up a little taller. "I only went through third grade, but I know them all the way through my 12s. "But, Mother, I can't." "You can do it, Benny. You just have to set your mind to concentrating. You work on them, and tomorrow when I get home from work, we'll review them. We'll keep on reviewing the times tables until you know them better than anyone else in your class." I argued a little more, but I should have known better. Besides, here came her final shot. "You're not to go outside and play after school tomorrow until you've learned those tables." I was almost in tears. "Look at all these things," I cried, pointing to the columns in the back of my math book. "How can anyone learn all of them?" Sometimes talking to Mother was like talking to a stone. Her jaw was set, her voice hard. You can't go outside and play until you learn your times tables. Mother wasn't home, of course, when school let out, but it didn't occur to me to disobey. She had taught Curtis and me properly, and we did what she told us. I learned the times tables. I just kept repeating them until they fixed themselves in my brain, like she promised that night Mother went over them with me. Her constant interest and unflagging encouragement kept me motivated. Within days after learning my times tables, math became so much easier that my scores soared. Most of the time, my grades reached as high as the other kids in my class. I'll never forget how I felt after another math quiz, when I answered Mrs. Williamson with 24. I practically shouted as I repeated, "I got 24 right." She smiled back at me in a way that made me know how pleased she was to see my improvement. I didn't tell the other kids what was going on at home or how much the glasses helped. I didn't think most of them cared. Things changed immediately and made going to school more enjoyable. Nobody laughed or called me the dummy in math anymore. But Mother didn't let me stop with memorizing the times tables. She had proven to me that I could succeed in one thing, so she started the next phase of my self-improvement program to make me come out with the top grades in every class. The goal was fine. I just didn't like her method. "I've decided you boys are watching too much television," she said one evening, snapping off the set in the middle of the program. "We don't watch that much," I said. I tried to point out that some programs were educational and that all the kids in my class watched television, even the smartest ones. As if she didn't hear a word I said, she laid down the law. I didn't like the rule, but her determination to see us improve changed the course of my life. "From now on, you boys can watch no more than 3 programs a week." A week? Immediately, I thought of all the wonderful programs I would have to miss. Despite our protest, we knew that when she decided we couldn't watch unlimited television, she meant it. She also trusted us, and both of us adhered to the family rules because we were basically good kids. Curtis, though a bit more rebellious than I was, had done better in his schoolwork, yet his grades weren't good enough to meet Mother's standards either. Evening after evening, Mother talked with Curtis, working with him on his attitude, urging him to want to succeed, pleading with him not to give up on himself. Neither of us had a role model of success, or even a respected male figure to look up to. I think Curtis, being older, was more sensitive to that than I was. But no matter how hard she had to work with him, Mother wouldn't give up. Somehow, through her love, determination, encouragement, and laying down the rules, Curtis became a more reasonable type of person and started to believe in himself. Mother had already decided how we would spend our free time when we weren't watching television. "You boys are going to go to the library and check out books. You're going to read at least 2 books every week. At the end of each week, you'll give me a report on what you've read." That rule sounded impossible. 2 books? I'd never read a whole book in my life, except those they made us read in school. I couldn't believe I could ever finish one whole book in a short week. But a day or two later found Curtis and me dragging our feet the 7 blocks from home to the public library. We grumbled and complained, making the journey seem endless. But Mother had spoken, and it didn't occur to either of us to disobey. The reason? We respected her. We knew she meant business and knew we'd better mind. But, most importantly, we loved her. "Benny," she said again and again, "if you can read, honey, you can learn just about anything you want to know. The doors of the world are open to people who can read. And my boys are going to be successful in life, because they're going to be the best readers in school." As I think about it, I'm as convinced today as I was back in the 5th grade that my mother meant that. She believed in Curtis and me. She had such faith in us, we didn't dare fail. Her unbounded confidence nudged me into starting to believe in myself. Several of Mother's friends criticized her strictness. I heard one woman ask, "What are you doing to those boys, making them study all the time? They're going to hate you." "They can hate me," she answered, cutting off the woman's criticism, "but they're going to get a good education just the same." Of course, I never hated her. I didn't like the pressure, but she managed to make me realize that this hard work was for my good. Almost daily, she'd say, "Benny, you can do anything you set yourself to do." Since I've always loved animals, nature, and science, I chose library books on those topics. And while I was a horrible student in the traditionally academic subjects, I excelled in fifth grade science. The science teacher, Mr. Jake, understood my interests and encouraged me by giving me special projects, such as helping other students identify rocks, animals, or fish. I had the ability to study the markings on a fish, for instance, and from then on, I could identify that species. No one else in the class had that knack, so I had my chance to shine. Initially, I went to the library and checked out books about animals and other nature topics. I became the fifth grade expert in anything of a scientific nature. By the end of the year, I could pick up just about any rock along the railroad tracks and identify it. I read so many fish and water life books that I started checking streams for insects. Mr. Jake had a microscope, and I loved to get water samples to examine the various protozoa under the magnified lenses. Slowly, the realization came that I was getting better in all my school subjects. I began looking forward to my trips to the library. The staff there got to know Curtis and me, offering suggestions on what we might like to read. They would inform us about new books as they came in. I thrived on this new way of life, and soon my interests widened to include books on adventure and scientific discoveries. By reading so much, my vocabulary automatically improved along with my comprehension. Soon I became the best student in math when we did story problems. Up until the last few weeks of fifth grade, aside from math quizzes, our weekly spelling bees were the worst part of school for me. I usually went down on the first word, but now, 30 years later, I still remember the word that really got me interested in learning how to spell. The last week of fifth grade, we had a long spelling bee in which Mrs. Williamson made us go through every spelling word we were supposed to have learned that year. As everyone expected, Bobby Farmer won the spelling bee, but to my surprise, the final word he spelled correctly to win was agriculture. I can spell that word, I thought with excitement. I'd learned it just the day before from my library book. As the winner sat down, a thrill swept through me, a yearning to achieve, more powerful than ever before. I can spell agriculture, I said to myself, and I'll bet I can learn to spell any other word in the world. I'll bet I could learn to spell better than Bobby. Learning to spell better than Bobby Farmer really challenged me. Bobby was clearly the smartest boy in the fifth grade. Another kid named Steve Cormos had earned the reputation as being the smartest kid before Bobby Farmer came along. Bobby Farmer impressed me during a history class because the teacher mentioned flax, and none of us knew what she was talking about. Then Bobby, still new in school, raised his hand and explained to the rest of us about flax, how and where it was grown, and how the women spun the fibers into linen. As I listened, I thought, Bobby sure knows a lot about flax. He's really smart. Suddenly, sitting there in the classroom with spring sunshine slanting through the windows, a new thought flashed through my mind. I can learn about flax or any subject through reading. It is like Mother says, if you can read, you can learn just about anything. I kept reading all through the summer, and by the time I began sixth grade, I'd learned to spell a lot of words without conscious memorization. In the sixth grade, Bobby was still the smartest boy in the class, but I was starting to gain ground on him. After I started pulling ahead in school, the desire to be smart grew stronger and stronger. One day I thought, it must be a lot of fun for everybody to know you're the smartest kid in the class. That's the day I decided that the only way to know for sure how that would feel was to become the smartest. As I continued to read, my spelling, vocabulary, and comprehension improved, and my classes became much more interesting. I improved so much that by the time I entered 7th grade at Wilson Junior High, I was at the top of the class. But just making it to the top of the class wasn't my real goal. By then, that wasn't good enough for me. That's where Mother's constant influence made the difference. I didn't work hard to compete and to be better than the other kids as much as I wanted to be the very best I could be, for me. Most of the kids who had gone to school with me in 5th and 6th grade also moved on to Wilson, yet our relationships had drastically changed during that 2-year period. The very kids who once teased me about being a dummy started coming up to me, asking, "Hey, Benny, how do you solve this problem?" Obviously, I beamed when I gave them the answer. They respected me now because I had earned their respect. It was fun to get good grades, to learn more, to know more than was actually required. Wilson Junior High was still predominantly white, but both Curtis and I became outstanding students there. It was at Wilson that I first excelled among white kids. Although not a conscious thing on my part, I like to look back and think that my intellectual growth helped to erase the stereotypical idea of blacks being intellectually inferior. Again, I have my mother to thank for my attitude. All through my growing up, I never recall hearing her say things such as white people are just... This uneducated woman married at 13 had been smart enough to figure out things for herself and to emphasize to Curtis and me that people are people. She never gave vent to racial prejudice and wouldn't let us do it either. Curtis and I encountered prejudice, and we could have gotten caught up in it, especially in those days, the early 1960s. 3 incidents of racial prejudice directed against us stand out in my memory. First, when I started going to Wilson Junior High, Curtis and I often hopped a train to get to school. We had fun doing that because the tracks ran parallel to our school route. While we knew we weren't supposed to hop trains, I placated to my conscience by deciding to get on only the slower trains. My brother would grab onto the fast-moving trains which had to slow down at the crossing. I envied Curtis as I watched him in action. When the faster trains came through, just past the crossing, he would throw his clarinet on one of the flat cars near the front of the train. Then he'd wait and catch the last flat car. If he didn't get on and make his way to the front, he knew he'd lose his clarinet. Curtis never lost his musical instrument. We chose a dangerous adventure, and every time we jumped on a train, my body tingled with excitement. We not only had to jump and catch a car railing and hold on, but we had to make sure the railroad security men never caught us. They watched for kids and hobos who hopped the trains at crossroads. They never did catch us. We stopped hopping trains for an entirely different reason. One day when Curtis wasn't with me, as I ran along the tracks, a group of older boys, all white, came marching toward me, anger written on their faces. One of them carried a big stick. "Hey, you boy!" I stopped and stared, frightened and silent. I've always been extremely thin and must have looked terribly defenseless, and I was. The boy with the stick whacked me across the shoulder. I recoiled, not sure what would happen next. He and the other boys stood in front of me and called me every dirty name they could think of. My heart pounded in my ears, and sweat poured down my sides. I looked down at my feet, too scared to answer, too frightened to run. "You know you kids ain't supposed to be going to Wilson Junior High. If we ever catch you again, we're going to kill you." His pale eyes were cold as death. "You understand that?" My gaze never left the ground. "Guess so," I muttered. I said, "Do you understand me, boy?" The big boy prodded. Fear choked me. I tried to speak louder. "Yes." "Then you get out of here as fast as you can run, and you'd better be keeping an eye out for us. Next time we're going to kill you." I ran then, as fast as I could, and didn't slow down until I reached the schoolyard. I stopped using that route and went another way. From then on, I never hopped another train, and I never saw the gang again. Certain that my mother would have yanked us out of school right away, I never told her about the incident. A second, more shocking episode occurred when I was in the 8th grade. At the end of each school year, the principal and teachers handed out certificates to the one student who had the highest academic achievement, in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades respectively. I won the certificate in the 7th grade, and that same year Curtis won for the 9th grade. By the end of 8th grade, people had pretty much come to accept the fact that I was a smart kid. I won the certificate again the following year. At the all-school assembly, one of the teachers presented my certificate. After handing it to me, she remained up in front of the entire student body and looked out across the auditorium. "I have a few words I want to say right now," she began, her voice unusually high. Then, to my embarrassment, she bawled out the white kids because they had allowed me to be number one. "You're not trying hard enough," she told them. While she never quite said it in words, she let them know that a black person shouldn't be number one in a class where everyone else was white. As the teacher continued to berate the other students, a number of things tumbled about inside my mind. Of course, I was hurt. I had worked hard to be at the top of my class, probably harder than anyone else in the school, and she was putting me down because I wasn't the same color. On the one hand, I thought, what a turkey this woman is. Then an angry determination welled up inside. I'll show you, and all the others too. I couldn't understand why this woman talked the way she did. She had taught me herself in several classes, had seemed to like me, and she clearly knew that I had earned my grades and merited the certificate of achievement. Why would she say all these harsh things? Was she so ignorant that she didn't realize that people are just people? That their skin or their race doesn't make them smarter or dumber? It also occurred to me that, given enough situations, there are bound to be instances where minorities are smarter. Couldn't she realize that? Despite my hurt and anger, I didn't say anything. I sat quietly while she railed. Several of the white kids glanced over at me occasionally, rolling their eyes to let me understand their disgust. I sensed they were trying to say to me, what a dummy she is. Some of those very kids who, 3 years earlier, had taunted me had become my friends. They were feeling embarrassed, and I could read resentment on several faces. I didn't tell my mother about that teacher. I didn't think it would do any good and would only hurt her feelings. The third incident that stands out in my memory centered around the football team. In our neighborhood, we had a football league. When I was in the 7th grade, playing football was the big thing in athletics. Naturally, both Curtis and I wanted to play. Neither of us Carsons were large to begin with. In fact, compared to the other players, we were quite small. But we had one advantage. We were fast. So fast that we could outrun everybody else on the field. Because the Carson brothers made such good showings, our performance apparently upset a few of the white people. One afternoon when Curtis and I left the field after practice, a group of white men, none of them over 30 years old, surrounded us. Their menacing anger showed clearly before they said a word. I wasn't sure if they were part of the gang that had threatened me at the railroad crossing. I only knew I was scared. Then one man stepped forward. "If you guys come back, we're going to throw you into the river," he said. Then they turned and walked away from us. Would they have carried out their threat? Curtis and I weren't as concerned about that as we were with the fact that they didn't want us in the league. As we walked home, I said to my brother, "Who wants to play football when your own supporters are against you?" "I think we can find better things to do with our time," Curtis said. We never said anything to anyone about quitting, but we never went back to practice. Nobody in the neighborhood ever asked us why. To Mother I said, "We decided not to play football." Curtis said something about studying more. We had decided to say nothing to Mother about the threat, knowing that if we did, she'd be worried sick about us. As an adult looking backward, it's ironic about our family. When we were young, through her silence, Mother had protected us from the truth about Dad and her emotional problems. Now it was our turn to protect her so she wouldn't worry. We chose the same method.